Glad to be here. I'm Charlie Parker. I'm alcoholic. My sobriety date is March 22nd of 1985, and for that, I am truly grateful. My sponsor is Myers. It's funny, I just had two pictures fall out of my big book. So my sponsor is Myers right there. That's one of the pictures that fell out. My home group is the Primary Purpose Group of Alcoholics Anonymous in Austin, Texas. We meet on Tuesday nights at 2701 South Lamar. If you're ever in Austin on a Tuesday night, we hope you'll come by and see us. We love having guests, and we usually have about 225 people on a Tuesday night studying the Big Book. It's a really powerful meeting. We study the Big Book line by line, week after week, and it's just a lot more fun than it sounds like. It's a powerful meeting, and there's a lot of energy in there. We hope you get to come see us sometime. We've been having a big crowd at our online, our Zoom meeting, and if you want, I'll give you here's the Zoom number for our meeting. And maybe Joe, you could post it on the chat box at some point. It's 630-577-473. That's Tuesday nights at 7:30 Texas time, Central Time. Okay. I said I've been sober since March 22nd of 1985. That's 35 years of sobriety, and I'm truly grateful for that. Now, some of y'all were here. I think Monday night, my wife spoke, and she's got 5.5 months more than I do. And it's the bane of my existence. You know, around our house, if I'm struggling, she'll say, "Well, honey, just stick around for about 5 more months, and it'll start to make sense to you." You know, but. I love Katie, and I hope you got to hear her talk on Monday. I had to swap with her on Monday because we did a bootleg human meeting Monday night out in the country at a friend of mine's property where we talked about steps 10 and 11. It was great to actually get to be around people and stuff. I miss the fellowship. You are my people. Let's see. I live in Austin, Texas, and a lot of my story takes place in Dallas, Texas, but I've been in Austin for 40 years, and that's where the Primary Purpose Group is. But I got to get going. I was going to start my timer. I grew up in Dallas. I live in Austin now, but I come from a pretty normal family. I was born in 1956 during the baby boom. I don't know exactly what a functional family looks like, but I know our house was okay. I mean, there was no drinking in our house. There wasn't anybody knocking each other around. I've heard enough footsteps over the years to know that a lot of people had it a lot worse than I did growing up. It was just a pretty decent family. Now, my dad was a salesman, sold forklifts most of the time. And my mother was a first grade school teacher for 42 years. I was pretty well prepared for the first grade. You know, in fact, I kind of kicked ass in the first grade. I kind of started Peter out after that. But, and the other thing was I had a sister that was perfect. I mean, my sister was really a tough act to follow. She was 5.5 years older than I am. And sorry, I had to get the screen the way I want it. Now we're good to go. I was picking up people that you can tell they're steadily peering from page to page to look at people. And it was really distracting me. Okay, I should tell you that I have a little attention deficit stuff going on. There will be times during the talk where I'll say, we're going to get back to that later. And what that means is that this ain't the right time in the talk to introduce that piece of information. But when I tell you we're going to get back to it later, we're probably not coming back. I always get real excited when I actually circle back around to one. But, my sister, like I said, here we are in the baby boom in the 60s. And my sister was just all everything. She was a first chair flute player. She was a drum majorette. She was high academics, gorgeous, and then there was me, kind of like her thuggish little brother. And I, it was a pretty tough act to follow, but, I also grew up. I don't know. I mean, I think a lot of us grew up under the burden of potential. I heard a lot about potential. My mother would say stuff like, because there was nothing more important in our house than IQ and education and stuff like that. And my mother would talk about high IQs. And what I heard when I heard that was that if you had a high IQ, you got a pass. What I can report to you now is that a high IQ will get you a front row seat in the meetings of Bucks Anonymous. You don't do anything with it, but I mean, my mother would say stuff like, if you could just apply yourself. I still don't really know how to do that. Why can't you be more like, if you could just live up to your potential, if you could be more like Charles Moliere across the street. And I remember thinking, God, that's flattering, Mom, but I'm really not holding back that much. You're kind of getting my best shot. But it was a competitive environment mentally and stuff. But I mean, none of that stuff made me alcoholic. I introduced myself as an alcoholic, but I've been granted the greatest gift that God can give an alcoholic of my variety, and that's recovery from the hopeless state of mind and body that's discovered in the Big Book. But when we talk about being a recovered alcoholic, what are we talking about having recovered from? Because it's funny. I mean, and on the Big Book, on the title page, and all this is right here is my sponsor is a book binder, and all this is a large print copy of the Big Book. And right on the title page is the first promise in the Big Book. It says the story of how many thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism. So already on the title page, it sounds stuff that's different from what I heard in the meetings for a long time. But, if we're talking about recovered, and I want to touch on that for just a second, because one of the things that I see in Alcoholics Anonymous, one of the unfortunate things is that, we have a lot of opinions and we stick to them firmly. And one of the problems I see in our room is that whenever we form a firing squad, we always form a circle. So we got some of our best members picking each other off over whether it's recovered or recovering or sponsee or protege or twofold illness, threefold illness, that sort of thing. But we like to say, don't let anybody read your Big Book for you. And what I would say is, if you find yourself having a strong opinion about something, ask yourself, where did that belief come from? And is it consistent with the message in our textbook? And if it is, rock on. But I mean, if we're talking about recovering, what are we talking about having recovered from? Because it's an important thing when I sit down with a guy, is to give him what I call a first step experience or a fatal dose of alcoholism. But it turns out, as an alcoholic, I have two problems with alcohol. One happens to me when I drink it. The other one happens to me when I don't drink it. Other than that, I don't struggle with alcohol. It only gives me trouble when I'm drinking it and when I'm not drinking it. And the first piece of it is that I have a physical reaction to alcohol that ain't regular. There's something that happens to me when I drink alcohol that doesn't happen to about 90% of the population. Only about 10% of the population even has the capacity to become alcoholic because of this physical aspect. The first piece is the physical aspect of alcoholism. And my sister doesn't have it. In doctor's opinion, he says a view of alcoholism that doesn't include this physical piece is lacking, because it was such a big deal when he came up with it. And it's just that, if you go to Roman numeral 28, you don't have to turn there, but he says, we believe, and so suggestive, this is Dr. Silkworth talking. He says that the action of alcohol in these chronic alcoholics, so we're talking about chronic alcoholics, and what is this reaction of alcohol? He says it's the manifestation, is the manifestation of an allergy. Well, manifestation just means the way something shows up. And for allergy's sake, we're just going to call it an abnormal physical reaction. If me and all the folks from Puente House were to sit down and start eating strawberries and everybody's doing fine, and all of a sudden my throat swells shut and I fall out, and you got to hit me with an EpiPen or call 911, you'd say, this guy's got an abnormal physical reaction to alcohol. And how does it manifest? The way it manifests is in the swelling. Well, how does my allergy to alcohol manifest? It calls it this phenomenon of craving. This is all real easy to roll right over. But, phenomenon just means it's something that happens, but we don't know exactly why it happens. We've seen it happen enough to know that it happens, but that's what makes it phenomenal. And what is this phenomenon? It calls it craving. When I take a drink, now we're getting down to it. When I take a drink of alcohol, it triggers this craving for more booze, no matter what my plans were going in. The problem was, I never thought that I triggered a phenomenon of craving. Nobody talks like that on their way to AA. I mean, I used to drink at this wonderful little bar in East Dallas called the Spillway Pub. And I can promise you that I never one time wandered in there on an afternoon and leaned up against the bar and went, oh, Bobby, 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 God almighty, the spiritual malady is on me today. And I had a beer on the way over here and it's triggered a phenomenon of craving that's kicking my butt. Nobody talked like that. This is all stuff that I learned on my way to, once I got to Alcoholics Anonymous. But the thing was, when I take a drink, it triggers a craving for more booze that I can't control. And the most important thing you can do with anything I say or anything this book says is lay it up against your experience and see if it's a fit. We believe in turning statements into questions in the big book. Take statements out of the big book, turn them into questions and say, is this my condition? Is this true for me? Does this match with my experience? Does this explain things I've never been able to explain before? And for me, the problem with recognizing the phenomenon of craving was I never thought that I triggered the phenomenon of craving. I just thought I changed my mind, right? The guys at work go, hey, man, we're going to go over to the pool hall after work and have a couple of beers. You want to go with us? And I'm like, yes, I do. Yes, I do. I'd love to go. And the thing is, though, we're over there shooting pool. And next thing you know, one of them goes, hey, man, listen, I got to bounce. My wife's making spaghetti at the house. And I told her I'd be home by 6:30, so I got to go. And I'm standing there going, yeah, no, I know I said I'd go with you, but no, go ahead. I'm going to stay here and blow my whole paycheck. And I didn't ever know I triggered the phenomenon of craving. I just thought I changed my mind. And the other thing about it, little piece, is that I didn't really say I'm going to stay here and blow my paycheck. I just always had a new plan. I know my plan was to go to dinner with you, but I got a new plan now. I'm going to stay here for another 30 minutes. I'm going to have one more. I'm going to catch up with you later. But the end result would be I've blown the paycheck again, and I can't figure out what happened. And it's a huge problem, and it talks about it a lot in the doctor's opinion in the first 23 pages of the big book. It's a terrible problem, but it's not my biggest problem. If my biggest problem was what happens when I drink alcohol, my solution would be real easy. It would be just don't drink alcohol. On page 23, all these observations about my drinking, it says, these observations would be academic and pointless if our friend never took the first drink, thereby setting the terrible cycle in motion. The piece that my mother never understood. It always seemed to my mother like he'd be a good boy if he just didn't drink. But she didn't understand what happens to me when I don't drink. My mom used to shake just this one finger at you, and she'd say, you are such an idiot. You drink every day. And I remember thinking, everybody I know drinks every day. And I didn't hang out with people that didn't drink every day. And what I didn't really know to tell her was that if drinking did for you what it does for me, you'd be stupid not to drink every day. Why would you ever take a day off from that? But it goes on. But she didn't understand what happens to me when I'm not drinking, because the second piece of alcoholism is that I don't get okay when I stop drinking. When I stop drinking, my problems don't go away. In fact, it feels like somebody turns the heat up on it. Back to that Roman numeral 28 again. I love this paragraph at the bottom. It says, men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. Any argument on that one? I think it's a little bit understated. I like banana pudding, but I love the effect produced by alcohol. First time I ever got loaded, I remember thinking, oh, we're going to do this a lot. And I didn't know it, but from that day till I found you people, drinking moved to the center of my life. And anything that got between me and drinking was going to get moved out of the way. And I didn't know it, but that was the deal. And Then it says, the sensation is so elusive that after a while I admit it's hurting me, but I can't tell the truth from the false. You know, one of the ways I can't tell the truth from the false is I think I ain't like the rest of these lambs in here. You know, I, I think I'm about to get a handle on it. You know, I'm sitting in my seventh treatment center thinking, yeah, I know it looks bad, but I ain't like these other guys in here. If I ever get as lame as you guys, I might try your stupid 12-step thing. I don't know anybody that's ever walked into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, no matter how tore up we are, and looked up at the steps on the wall and gone, yeah, that ought to do it. I'm sitting there thinking, that might work for you, lambs, but if you understood how complex and complicated my situation is and the things that have happened to me or the things that never happened to me, or you'd be embarrassed to be offering me your stupid little 12-step program. But we get crushed by this self-imposed crisis, and it makes it will. And here's the second piece of it. It says, to me, and it says, to them, their alcoholic life seems the only normal one. You know, I don't go from the way I started to the way I showed up here in one day. It happens in little ticks over a period of time. Tick, 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 tick. And by the time I started compromising my values and I started doing things I didn't ever think I would do. And I always got a story to go with it. But I mean, by the time I get here, today looks a lot like yesterday. And yesterday looks a lot like last week. And it looks like it feels like I'm just doing whatever I got to do to get by. And I love this where it says, to them, their alcoholic life seems the only normal one. Here's a fact for you. It's going to blow your mind. This is going to blow your mind. Did you know that most people are born, live their whole lives, and die without ever being arrested? I know. It's crazy. If I was to go to my mother and say, my sainted 97-year-old mother, and say, Mom, I can't come over. I got to go see my PO and give it a UA because I got a DUI. She would have no idea what I'm talking about. But in our rooms, that's commonplace. Where we're going, oh, man, that sucks. Who's your PO? You know, I can tell you how to beat a UA. How much time you got? You know, and it says, my alcoholic life seems the only normal one. Now, here's where the second piece of alcoholism comes in. It says I don't get okay when I stop drinking. This is talking about dry periods. I get restless. I get irritable. I get discontented. I don't like the deal I'm getting. And it says unless I can again have the sense of ease and comfort that comes at once by taking a few drinks. Drinks I see other people taking with impunity. You know what impunity means? It means they don't get punished for it. They get to have a couple of drinks and it doesn't cost them their job and their bank account and their dignity and their freedom and their house and their marriage. They just get to go have a couple of drinks. And when I get uncomfortable enough, I start wanting to know, where's mine? How come this Nimrod gets to go have a couple of drinks and I don't? You know, and I get so uncomfortable. So what happens is, I'm going to sum this up. This is the whole step one experience. Is that when I drink, it triggers the craving. Now I'm drinking and I'm drinking and I'm drinking and I'm drinking. And after a while, it starts getting really bad. It gets really bad until finally I have to stop or I get stopped. Now I've stopped but it's better and it's getting better. And, you know, maybe I was making too big of a deal out of the thing. But before you know it, I start getting restless. I start getting irritable. I start getting discontented. I start getting uncomfortable. People start bugging me. People that I'm in treatment with, the people, you know, that guy just gave me a look. The people, and before you know it, I get so uncomfortable that I need relief until it triggers this mental obsession to take a drink, and I take the first drink. So I trigger the phenomenon of craving again. So I drink until I have to stop, and then I stop until I have to drink, and then I drink until I have to stop, and I stop until I have to drink. And if you're caught in that terrible cycle, believe me, there's a bottom below. The bottom, you know. What seems terrible now might not seem terrible in a few years. It gets worse and worse and worse. Well, when you get over to page 24, it says that somewhere in our drinking, I started drinking at 13, but I didn't really get good and started till I was 16, you know, and I probably didn't need the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous till I was maybe 17, you know, but I mean, you know, I started drinking and started really getting away from it. It was fun for a while. We had some stuff going along, you know, but after a while, it started going downhill. I started dropping out of the high academic courses. I started getting in trouble. I started having things happen. One night I rammed into a car. I was leaving a bar in my mother's car, and I rammed into a parked car, and I pulled it around the corner, and I jumped out, and I go running by, and I'm running back to the bar to report the car stolen. And I look, and there's two cops standing there by that car, and they're shining their flashlight down on glass everywhere. And I'm looking around, and I'm like, man, they got here really fast. And the next day, I called the car and stolen. And now let me tell you, this is not an extraordinary night. This is just a day in the life of Charlie. And the next morning, they call me and they go, Mr. Parker, you're going to have to give a polygraph test before you can come get your car. And I go, why is that? And they said, well, it was involved in an accident before it was reported stolen. I said, you're kidding. And I said, no, they rammed into a parked police car. And I remember thinking, that explains how they got there so fast. Because I've been a little foggy on that one. But, things are starting to happen. I've lost the power of choice and control. On page 24 in the big book, some heavy stuff. It says, at a certain point of the drinking of every alcoholic, he passes into a state where the most powerful desire to stop drinking is of absolutely no avail. We all know the only requirement for membership in AA is a desire to stop drinking. A desire to stop drinking will get me a front row seat in any meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. It says right there on page 24, it won't do a damn thing to keep me sober. It says the most powerful desire to stop drinking is of no avail. And we pass into a state where and so it says the fact is, for reasons yet obscure, most alcoholics have lost the power of choice and drink. My so-called willpower becomes practically non-existent. I'm unable at certain times to bring into my consciousness with sufficient force the memory of the suffering and humiliation of even a week or a month ago. I've crossed this invisible line somewhere along the line. I don't know when it happened. I think that's why we call it an invisible line. But somewhere along the line, I didn't have the power to choose whether I was going to drink anymore, and I didn't. And then once I started drinking, I couldn't control it. It's a tight spot. And the way I like to talk about that is with the pawn shops. Man, I loved pawn shops. I loved everything about pawn shops. I loved the purity of it. I never went into a pawn shop and had the pawnbroker go, weren't you just here this morning? Or good God, man, what are you going to do with this money? It's never like that. You just give them the shotgun and they give you the money. And you give them the rifle and they give you the money. And the thing about it was, I always had a plan. And the plan was that I had 90 days to get everything out of the pawn shop. And I could usually pull some kind of a scam or do some kind of a deal that would get everything out of the pawn shop. And we drunks make some great plans. I mean, we make plans that you could take over to the university and they'd look it over and go, man, that's a pretty solid plan, and our plans work right up till they quit working. And my plan was I had 90 days to get everything out of the pawn shop. Now, I don't want to forget to tell you that another piece of the deal was that I didn't own very much stuff. So I was having to pawn stuff that didn't belong to me. And that adds a little heat to the equation, but I still had a plan, right? We're going to get everything out before it goes to the pawn shop and that sort of thing. So one time I've got everything scattered out in the pawn shops and it's getting close to go time, and I pulled this insurance scam and it was enough money to get everything out of the pawn shop. So, but the first order of business is to go by the Spillway pub and settle my tab because it was the only pub in that town that would let me run a tab. And this was in 1983, 84. And they'd let me run a $60 tab, which was enough to go for me. And it was very important to settle that tab. Now, I'm not going to go crazy. I'm just going to go by and pay my tab and then go hit all the pawn shops. The next thing I know, now I'm a blackout drinker. I blacked out a lot. I thought you were supposed to. I constantly was about oblivion. I was never, a civilized drinker. I'd like to tell you that I drank a fifth of whiskey from the time I was 16 until the time I got to AA at 28. I'd like to tell you I drank a fifth of whiskey every day. That wouldn't be true. But what I can tell you, and this isn't everybody's experience in AA, but what I can tell you for me is that during that 12 years, I never one time turned down the opportunity to get loaded under any circumstances for any reason. There was never a time when you would hold something out and I would go, oh man, no, y'all go ahead. It's my mother's birthday. So we'll worry about it later. I was always about oblivion. So this come a morning, I come out of a blackout and I'm sitting on the edge of the bed at my mother's house. I should tell you that I was so poorly treated as a child that I ran away from home for good at the age of 28. I'm serious. Never went back. I mean, I had some apartment. I stayed with some people, and I had a rent house or two in there. But I mean, like any good gangster, I'd always wind up back at mom's house, And so when I come out of this blackout, and I'm sitting on the edge of the bed at my mother's house, and I can still tell you the entire environment, the color of the carpet, the wallpaper, the furniture, the temperature of the room, because I'm sitting there, and in this right-hand pocket, I had $8. And in my left-hand pocket, I still had all those pawn tickets. And we've all had those mornings where you're just going, oh no. Oh no. Because now I'm out of tricks and I don't feel very good. And I shot my wad on that last scam and I got nothing. And I would have to go to my father, who's a good man, and say, Dad, listen, if we act now, I can get you a pretty good deal on all your stuff. But if we wait till tomorrow, it's strictly retail. So there's some urgency. And I have to say that like it's kind of funny because if I touch the desperation and the worthlessness that I felt on that morning of having to go to my dad and say it, I'm liable to cry like a little girl in a pink dress anyway at any point during the talk. But I mean, that is one that hits me really hard, because the thing was, we would get in his pickup truck, and Dallas is a big spread out town. And it wasn't just we're going to go to the pawn shop. It was we got to go up on Beltline Road and get your metal detectors. And I left your shotgun on East Grand, and your deer rifles out on Oak Cliff, and your coin collection is on Garland Road. And it was all day in the car with me and my dad and all that shame. And when we'd be driving around, I'd be going, Dad, I swear to God, I will never do this again. I don't want to feel like this. I don't want you to feel like this. I swear to God, I will never do this again. If I was lying to that man, I damn sure didn't know it because it felt like I meant it with every fiber of my being. I will never do this again. What I didn't know riding around in the truck with him is that I didn't have the power to make good on that promise. Promising him that I was never going to do that again would be like promising you people that I could flap my arms and fly around my front yard out here and land back in this chair because I did not have the power to do it. When we talk about powerless, that's what I'm talking about when I talk about powerlessness. I'm not talking about people, places, and things. I'm talking about being in the first step. I'm talking about being powerless over taking that first string. And because I would hit the back door of his house like a cat burglar within 3 days, and it would just be like that. And I would grab, and I would off to the pawn shops. By the time this went on for years, and by the time I got to you people, my father and I had to make the round of the pawn shops 3 different times. There was 3 times I couldn't pull it off. That's how cool I was. That's how slick I was. That's the guy that I brought to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. I was a burden to anyone that was unfortunate enough to love me or care about me. And I had no answers, and I couldn't imagine anything going any differently. There's a thing on page 100 that I don't always talk about. It calls it the jumping off place. And it says, that's not where it is. I think it's on 152. But anyway, it talks about he cannot imagine life without alcohol. And then it goes on to say one day he'll be unable to imagine life either with or without alcohol. Then he will know loneliness such as few men do. He will be at the end. He'll be at the jumping off place. Here it is. He will wish for the end. For a long time, I couldn't imagine life without alcohol. That's not what brought me to AA. What brought me to AA was that jumping off place where it's like, I know I can't keep drinking the way I've been drinking, but I can't imagine not drinking. I can't imagine my life with alcohol anymore. I can't imagine without it. I came here, no answers, and tore down. And the thing the book talks about is the desperation of a drowning man. Well, I want to talk about a couple of experiences I've had in AA, because I had my biggest spiritual awakening after I'd been sober for a long time. And I want to talk about some of the difference between then and now. Trying to get through that first step stuff pretty fast, but I came to AA and I was totally down with it. I mean, I loved the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. And Bob's on here tonight, and Bob was the first one I ever heard talking about being one of the lucky ones. I thought everybody loved the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, and not everybody does. In fact, when we do live conferences, sometimes we'll get people to raise their hand. How many of you really just loved the fellowship when you first got here? And it's about 15%. I mean, there's a lot of people that just, didn't dig it. I love drunks. I love you people. I love the laughter. I love everything about it, but I worked the steps. I thought I was a big book guy. I had a sponsor, and we went through the steps, but Mark used to say, how do you know what you don't know? And I didn't know what I was missing. I was doing it the best I could. But I mean, I was going to meetings. I had gotten around. There was some God in my life. The 12 and 12 talks about you can have faith in God, but keep him out of your lives. And the way that looks for a guy like me is my God consciousness starts to sink down and my self-will starts to rise up. And before long, God ain't got nothing to do with it. And I'm running the whole show and I don't even know it. We get back to that. Then my old approach to the steps, I mean, basically it was, are you alcoholic? We didn't spend a whole lot of time talking about what that means. I'm like, well, I must be, because I don't know anybody that drinks more than I do. I've met some since then. I mean, we got some impressive stories. And there was a guy leaning up against the trip to the emergency room in a week, and the one he had just came from, his blood alcohol level was 5.1. Now, this is the only fellowship where we'll nudge each other and go, 5.1? That's pretty solid right there, But I mean, we didn't talk a lot about what it means to be an alcoholic. Do you believe in God? I don't know, not so much. I'm not completely down with it. Turns out about half of our fellowship wasn't really down with it either. But that first step experience will make me have the desperation of a drowning man. And one of the beauties of working with drowning men is they don't ask a lot of questions. A drowning man's not going to go, pardon me, before we proceed, how much experience do you have saving drowning men? And how is this going to go? It doesn't go like that. It's just healthy. And then, on 27, it says, we in our turn sought the same escape with the desperation of a drowning man, and what seemed at first to be a flimsy reed turned out to be the loving and powerful hand of God, but not till I reached for it, But step one, maybe, and so step 3, we just got down on our knees and did the third step prayer, which pushed me right into writing inventory. And my first inventory was kind of like a confession of who I was bad at and bad things I've done. And then we did a 5th step, and then 6 and 7, whatever. And then on the 8th step, I made a list. And then I was amazed before I was halfway through. I made some of the biggest amends. Step 10, maybe if I really fouled up, I might do a couple of the pieces of step 10. Evening review, almost never. And then as far as morning prayer and meditation, I would pray sometimes, and I would keep a copy. On a good day, I would pick up a copy of the 24-hour-a-day book. Might as well have read it and gone, okay, God, see you tomorrow. And then, but I'm doing all this fellowship, and I'm sponsoring guys, and I don't know what I'm telling them. I'm transmitting whatever experience I had. But I mean, my life is not going very well, And I mean, I'm almost in. I was working a program like the problem was alcohol, and I was working a program based on the absence of alcohol, and the problem is physical sobriety starts to look like recovery, and my life did get a lot better without the drinking. But that guy, that's the guy that's in the meetings going, well, I screamed at my wife this morning and I slapped one of the kids on my way out of the house, and I burned out of the driveway. I got to work an hour late, and I looked at 2 hours of internet pornography, and Went to lunch, had a couple of drinks. I came back and gambled on the internet for a while. I left work an hour and a half early. We got a half gallon of vanilla ice cream and ate it in the front seat of the car without a spoon. But I didn't drink today, and by God, that makes me a winner, you know. And we're like, well, that makes you something. I'm not sure winner is the first thing we would have gone to, but I mean, I was almost always in collision with something or somebody, and I didn't know why. I got married at 2.5 years sober. About 4.5 years, I've blown that deal up, and so I pull out of that marriage, come out of that, and I wait the appropriate amount of time to get into another relationship, right? 16 days, and I go into another relationship. And now, last 7 years, I've blown up that marriage. I got another baby on the ground, another child support check going out the door. And I mean, things are going badly. I hit a wall at 4.5 years. I hit a wall at 7 years. I met Bob when I had coming out of that first divorce at 4.5 years. And he was the first person I'd ever heard talking about having significant problems in recovery. It seemed like everybody else, everything was just lovely, lovely. And I'm over here going, man, I am having a really hard time here, you know? And but you know, after that second divorce, I remember thinking, I pulled away from AA a little bit. I remember thinking, you know, screw it. I've tried it your way, and I'm getting knocked to the mat every time I step in the ring. And, you know, and I pulled back a little bit. And I went into this flat period in my sobriety. I like to, but it's really untreated alcoholism, but we're going to talk about that in a minute. But I mean, what happened was I was still very much about staying sober. I was very much about being in AA and not drinking and that sort of thing. But I kind of backed off on the rigorous honesty and some of those exercises, that sort of thing. And I get into this dishonest marriage. And long story short, now this marriage from the outside looked great. I've blown up 2 marriages in a row that I thought had all this passion and excitement and everything. I get into this one, I thought it exciting, but there was a lot of reasons to be in it. It was very tacky, but let me just say there were millions of reasons for being in this marriage. And we had a penthouse apartment in New York City. We had a beach house in the Hamptons. And we're traveling all over the world. And to my mother, it looked like it was the pinnacle. I'm telling you, it was the most dishonest relationship I've ever been in, because she wasn't getting what she thought she was getting, you know. And so, you know, Katie is my best friend, and we met when I had 6 months of sobriety. Now, Katie, and when we were like best friend, like brother and sister for 20 years. I was at her wedding. Her kids grew up calling me Uncle Charlie. I mean, there was no flirtation, no innuendo. She's my best friend, like a kid sister. And now she's watching all this go on, and she's just disgusted. You know, I mean, I'm like, oh, so I guess this doesn't live up to your Christian values. And she's like, no, it doesn't. You know, and the more it bugged Katie, the more it tickled me, you know, because now I didn't know we were going to wind up dating, or I probably would have filtered some of that information, because it was a tough transition. But, you know, we got this. So one time we're out in the Hamptons, then we come flying back into the city. And we've chartered a plane to fly into New York City. And I mean, it's July 20th, 2003. We're in a Cessna 210. And we're at about 3,500, about 9 o'clock at night. And we're about 3,500 feet in the air, and the engine quits. And just all of a sudden, it's just like, whoosh, and we're in a glider now. And I mean, I'll never forget it. I put on the headphones. I'm in the co-pilot seat. I'm not a co-pilot. And the pilot says, I hear him saying to him, you know, when I put the headphones on, he's going, come on, come on, come on. And he's jacking his throttle and singing. They say, you're cleared to Gabreski. And there's a runway over here at 10 o'clock, but we're not going to make it. We're not going to clear the water or the trees, and we're darn sure not going to make that runway. And he says, you don't understand. I've lost engine power. I can't make land. I'm going to have to ditch. I'm like, what? And I'm a gambler my whole life. What are the odds the first time I ever charter a plane, we're going to crash it into the water at night? And he says, brace for impact. Anybody know how to do that? You know, I put my hands on the dashboard. We come in. We have retractable landing gear, thank God. They turn us towards the shore where there's some lights, and we come approaching the water, and all of a sudden, whoosh, we hit the water, and it's like spray and noise and all this blast and everything. And then absolute silence. And I remember thinking, my God, I think we're okay. Now, about that time, I felt something warm on my knee. Now, this wasn't much of an airplane, really crappy boat. And I mean, my door won't come open, and I got about a half a lung full of air, and the plane goes down like that, and I go up to get some more air, and there's nothing but water in the roof of the plane. And I remember thinking, so that's it. That's it. We died today in this stinking airplane, right? Now, spoiler alert, I didn't die, but I come home, and now things are different. I laughed, and that's no Earl Hightower story, but it was pretty flippin' dramatic in my life, you know. And here's what I think is more the interesting part of my story is this second approach to the work that happened. Because what happened was I knew I was in trouble, and I knew I, was off the beam. And my buddy Danny B likes to say, I thought I was okay if I could still see the broad highway. You know, it's a little rough out here. I'm getting a little beat up and stuff. But I mean, so I'm trying to get reconnected. I come back because I know I'm in trouble. And I wound up calling up John Henry. And I said, John Henry, I am so self-centered that I can't even be in a conversation with anybody. Now, I didn't even know it was mentioned in our book. But I mean, it's like when I would see somebody, I would just have to go, hey, Dan, how are the kids? You know, and act like the questions you're supposed to ask. But I had to act like I gave a flip about the answers. You know, I've been quoting Bob for years because he said his first sponsor told him, Bob, you know those shadowy figures out there? Goes, those aren't people. You know, and you're like, really? You're like, yeah, they have lives and worries of their own. And you're like, what? You know, I mean, because I am so self-centered, I come back, but I get with John Henry, and he says, let's go out to the treatment center and go see the winos. And so we start, he loved calling it. He was a wino. He liked saying winos. But we're going out to this treatment center. Now, I got 17 years sober, and now there were times where I felt like I was a step ahead of these guys. There were times where I would say, a guy would want to sit down with me, and I go, okay, listen, go home and read the doctor's opinion and Bill's story, and I'd go home and read the doctor's opinion and Bill's story. But man, the ego can be put to work for good cause. And I'm not going to be embarrassed more than once about this stuff. So I'm starting to study the process now. And now about that time, I 12-stepped a friend of mine who's since passed away. But Tom had a slight pill problem. He was taking about 125 Vicodin a day. It turns out that's at least one too many. But I went over to his house one day, and we got him into treatment and place in the hill country in Texas, and he met this one-eyed guy down there named Chris R. And we started having conversations with me and Tom, and we're talking about, what do you do when they say this? Now, and our conversations are changing. Now we're talking about sponsoring people and having an experience. And what do you say when they say that? Well, that's when I'll go to this page, or I'll say that. Have you ever heard of the benevolence? No, what do they say? Well, they're on page 52. And then and we're talking about these kinds of things. And I'm starting to listen to Chris. And then I get Myers to sponsor me, and then we're talking about things at a different level now. And Katie's getting drugged along with it. She used to get a little upset that me and Tom were spending an hour in the mornings talking about this 12-step stuff. But Katie's coming out, and Katie had her own experience with untreated alcoholism, and I mean, I'm telling you, we nearly lost Katie. It was so close, and I'm pulling her around to AA meetings, because I love Katie with all my heart. From the moment I met her, she's always just tickled the heck out of me. I never dreamed we'd be a couple, and now we've been together for 17 years. But, one day, Katie and I would go to this workshop. And it was a guy named Mark Houston and another guy doing this workshop. And oh my God, we get in this workshop. And at one point, I leaned over to Katie and I go, what book are they reading from? Because he is saying stuff that I had never heard before, and I've read that book more than once. But these guys were doing it on a whole different level. And it turns out that step 1 meant something way different than I thought it meant, which we've talked about. Step 3 meant something way different than a lot of people in AA, the third step is the third step prayer. And that was my experience. If we're making any mistakes in AA, I think the biggest mistake we make is taking a guy right from hurrying him through the first step. Do you believe in God? If he says yes, get him on his knees and do the third step prayer and get him right in inventory. That was my experience. It's very common in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I used to not like talking about it, how much I'd missed, until I realized how much company I had. because what happens is if you skip from A, B, and C over to the third step prayer, you miss this body of work in pages 60 to 63. And it's really not very important. It's just the root of my problem and the basis of my recovery for the rest of my life, and so, it turns out, I think the most important thing I like to talk about people with these days is after that A, B, and C on step 3, it says, being convinced we are at step 3, which means A, B, and C does a good job of describing 1 and 2. If I'm convinced of them, I need to turn that into a question and ask myself if I believe that. And here's the piece I missed for so long. I'm reading the book one time and it says, the next paragraph says, the first requirement, this is a requirement for step 3. It says the first requirement is that I be convinced that my life run on self-will can hardly be a success. And I'm telling you, not only was I not convinced of that, that line had never touched me because I'd gone right from do you believe in God to the third step prayer. Well, this is game-changing stuff because now it says on the basis of self-will, I'm almost always in collision with something or somebody, even though my motives were good. I can't even trust my motives now. And then I've got this delusion that, yeah, it looks bad now, but if everybody just done what I said, we'd all be better off. So it doesn't seem selfish, right? Because I got good motives, and if everybody had acted right. So when I run my actions through that funnel, the worst I'm ever going to give myself is about an A-. Well, but I'm always in jackpots, and I don't know why. It talks about the toolkit of self-will, and it goes on to say what usually happens, the show didn't come off very well. That's where most of my 10 steps go with guys these days. Let me guess. The show didn't come off very well. And it says, I started thinking life doesn't treat me right. And it says, is he not really a self-seeker, even when trying to be kind? All this stuff just changed everything for me because now this selfishness, this self-centeredness changes everything. Because now I'm not working a program like the problem is alcohol. It says that above everything, I got to be rid of this selfishness. Mark looked at me right in the eye one time and he goes, what do the words above everything mean to you? It doesn't even say above everything, we got to stop drinking. Well, what we're talking about is when you start having this awareness of what selfishness is. It turns out alcohol never was my problem. Alcohol was the only thing I ever found that would ease the discomfort of a life based on selfishness and self-centeredness. I could talk about this stuff all night, but what we're talking about is the second surrender. The first surrender is the surrender to booze and whatever else brought me in here, but this second surrender, the surrender to self-will, usually happens after we've been banging around this deal for a while, trying to do this deal sober. The problem was when I was blowing up those marriages, pulling away and blowing up another one and backing away, I didn't have anybody in my life. I thought I was up against the failure of Alcoholics Anonymous. But I didn't have anybody in my life saying, Charlie, you're not up against the failure of Alcoholics Anonymous. You're up against the failure of self-will. This is what it looks like when you try to run your life sober as a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. You're almost always in collision with something or something. Well, now, I had my biggest spiritual awakening when I had 17 years of sobriety. And I love seeing Glenn Kay on here and Joe because I love the guys that record these talks and stuff because a whole lot of what I experienced in this second surrender was coming from driving around listening to speaker tapes and listening to CDs. And we started reading 2 pages a day out of the big book. And I started working with guys and studying the book. And now we're asking different questions. We're turning statements into questions. And we've established spiritual consent with each other where you get to call me on whatever you see me doing, whether it hurts my feelings or not. And I don't get to say anything other than thank you, I'll consider that. And now we're looking at manifestations of self, and it shows up all over the place. But I don't have time to give any examples, but when we're blowing up those marriages, now it turns out that my problems are the biggest shift a guy can take in recovery is going from my problems are coming at me to my problems are coming from me. Because if you're not careful, people in AA after a couple of divorces will say, well, you got a broke picker. You're like, no, I drive people crazy. I take people that are in this way when I meet them, and they're nuts when I break up with them. And that's the effect of spending that amount of time with somebody as selfish and self-centered as I am. is that I blow it up and I don't even know why. Well, now I'm about continuing inventory and multiple fifth steps, and 6 and 7 has taken on a whole depth of meaning to me now. I'm always having stuff that I don't have the power to change. I have to take it to God. We're about making all of our amends. I made a list at 17 years sober. It had 42 items on it. I'll never sit here and tell you that I've made amends to everybody I've harmed. But I can tell you tonight that I've made amends to everybody that I'm aware of. And I've sponsored guys with depth and weight, and now the disciplines of 10 and 11 are taking on new life with me. And the problem is when I'm doing a 10 step, I'm almost done. But when I call with a 10 step, I can't have somebody talking about them. If I call with a problem with them and they start talking about them, I'm a dead man. I got to have somebody that's going to take me to where'd you set the ball rolling? How'd you make decisions based on self? Where did you place yourself in a position to be harmed? And I mean, it changes the whole inventory process because I don't need to give them forgiveness. I need awareness. How many times do I come into an inventory process with a resentment, see it from an entirely different angle, see how selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, frightened I was? I come out, I go, oh my God, it's not at all like I thought it was. I come in with a resentment, I see it from a different angle, I go out the other end with an amends to go back. It happens over and over and over again. More awareness, I need less forgiveness. Well, all I can tell you is the last 18 years of my sobriety, I have been on fire with the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I almost missed it. If I'd have died in that plane crash, I would have missed it. I'm an NFL football fan. I assume we're all Dallas Cowboy fans here. And, I've been a Dallas Cowboy fan since they were good, But, I've got high hopes for this year. But one time, this guy, I've been going to games forever, and this guy that I sponsored, his family had a skybox. And we go up into that skybox one time, and I'm looking around, and it's a whole different. And I don't know whether to be excited about being in the skybox or to be pissed off and sad about having sat in the cheap seats for 20 years. But that was exactly my experience with Alcoholics Anonymous. I almost missed it. If you'd have come to me when I had 17 years of sobriety and said, Charlie, what's going to change your life and set you on fire is the program of Alcoholics Anonymous coming right out of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, I would have told you you're nuts. I've been in AA for 17 years. I know what it has to offer me. And I'm telling you, I've never stuck a toe in the water. If you're new here tonight, we love you. We want to welcome you. We want you to stay here with us. But I think there's a ton of message of hope for the new guy in Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm here to talk to the people that have been around for a minute. They've got 5 years, 11 years, 15 years, 25 years, 30 years, and you're not feeling it. You're not feeling it the way you hear some people describing it. And I'm here to tell you it's still available. And it's available as a result of getting with somebody and saying, I don't know what to do. I'm in trouble. Will you help me? Will you take me through this process? And will you show me? On page 152, it says the most satisfactory years of our existence lie ahead of us. Ask yourself, is that your current belief? Is that what I believe? Or does it seem like it peters out after 5 or 10 years? What if it turns out that the rest of my life could be the best of my life? Is that your experience? It's real simple. If you need it, come get it. And if you've got it, get out and share it. What's stopping you? I'm Charlie Parker. I'm alcohol. Thanks for listening to me.